What's up, rockers? YouTube Lone Star here at the Texas Theater to check out Joe Bob Briggs from Monstervision. They're doing a special screening of My Bloody Valentine, just in time for Valentine's Day. So let's get inside there and check it out.
And we would like to welcome you out to a special night at the Texas Theater. How many of you guys are in love this year? How many of you guys are in love with horror films this year? Correct answer. Even if you don't have a human, you also always have the cold, dead warmth of a horror film. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to bring the man of the night out. He is the world's only drive-in movie critic. He is all of our heroes. He is my personal hero. He is Dallas's own, the one and only, Mr. Joe Bob Briggs!
Just out of curiosity, how many of you were here in this same theater 2 years ago for my real show? Only 10 of you. Okay, then I got to come back and do it again. That was before we had the marathon and everything. Now, I have to say, first of all, that is the weirdest meet and greet line I've ever been in my life. We have some major alcoholics here tonight. And there are 5 of you that we are going to report to the FBI profile. Just the things you said in the line. So, first of all, it's the 39th anniversary to the day of My Bloody Valentine being released. This is a slasher, as if you didn't know. The era of the slasher film was from about I say the era of the slasher film was 1973 to 1987. Now, you know, it's kind of starting to fade away when you start getting parodies like Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, and you know it's over by 1991 when Jonathan Demme makes Silence of the Lambs, you know, big budget Hollywood version of every slasher for the past 18 years. So that's when the genre went mainstream. But in fact, you know, not many people know this, but Ron Bozeman, who was the first AD and production guy on Silence of the Lambs, had been production manager on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So he saw both ends. He saw the $50,000 version, and then he saw the $50 million version of the ultimate slasher film. I interviewed him one time, and he said Texas Chainsaw Massacre was by far the better ride and the wilder ride. So the heyday of the slasher was about 1978 when Halloween came out to 1984, Nightmare on Elm Street. And during that time, these movies were box office hits that were just despised by the mainstream and despised by the studios and despised by the MPAA. You were slumming if you made one of these films. So enter the Canadian slum dwellers. Because this was also the time of the Canadian tax shelter, where you could go up to Canada and they would just give you, you know, they would just throw money at you to make a movie in Canada. Mostly, all those movies made in Canada were American productions that went up there to get a tax break. But the Canadians had rules, and those rules were you had to have a certain percentage of your cast be Canadian citizens. That's why Donald Sutherland is in every movie in the 80s. That's why Donald Sutherland is in 8,000 movies, you know, 8,000 bad movies, you know, he's Canadian. So you had to hire a certain number of Canadians in key creative positions, and you couldn't just hire them for bit parts. At least one of the leads had to be a Canadian. So this movie is one of the few that is made by Canadians. It's all Canadian all the time. You will notice there's a moose head in almost every scene. Unlike Black Christmas, where there's an American flag in almost every scene because they didn't want you to know it was Canadian. This genre was gone by 1973. It was a 4-year genre, and then it was gone. Also, Snowballin'. Has anybody seen Snowballin'? They made that movie. 1971, ski instructor sleeps with one woman after another. Death of a Lumberjack. Young girl comes to Montreal to find her dad and is forced to sing country and western songs topless. 7 times a day, a Montreal architect has to have sex with every woman he meets. And, so they made about 10 of these, and they made a whole lot of money. But now the genre is dead, and they don't know what to do. And by the way, never Google maple syrup porn. You will see things, they don't know what it is, so you'll see things you don't see. Maple syrup porn has been over for 6 years. They've tried Cronenberg. They've tried Rape Revenge. They're not making enough money. They decide to they say, let's just go straight down the middle. Let's just do a pure D formula slasher. Let's just go for it. Let's use every cliche in the book. Although in my opinion, they didn't know the right cliches. They got the formula slightly wrong, which we'll talk about in a minute. But they made a couple of mistakes on it. But the interesting thing about the film is that it's not. Slashers were almost always shot in the suburbs, so you could kill babysitters, or so you could kill, obnoxious white kids. The interesting thing about this film is it's not shot in the suburbs. It has more in common with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was based on the Hansel and Gretel story, where all the menacing stuff is out in the dark woods. But in this case, the menacing stuff is 2,700 feet under the ground. And to get that, they went to a town called Sydney Mines. It's a small town in Nova Scotia, cold as fuck. It's an old mining community on Cape Breton. And the mines there go back to the year 1766. And some of the mines, here's what's interesting about it to me. Some of the mines go 5 miles out, they go way down, then they go 5 miles out under the ocean, which they should have made more of in the movie, because that's scary. You're not only that far under the ground, you're also under the ocean, and you're 5 miles out into the ocean. Anyway, the Princess Colliery Mine, which was the name of it, closed in 1975 after being there for more than 200 years. But I guess they do this in Canada. They just left all the stuff there. The rail tracks still worked, and the shafts were still open, Seems kind of dangerous even for pets, but they just left the thing open in this town of about 8,500 people. So they actually built the plot around that town and the mines. So the town itself is kind of a character in the movie. Lori Hallier is the female lead. Sarah, she's the character of Sarah. She became a veteran character actress. She's still working in Canada. She had a couple of minor roles in TV series before she made this, but she has been in everything in Canada for years and years now. She was also in Night of the Twisters, Deadly Tornado movie. She was in The Other Me, a sci-fi comedy. She plays the mom a lot. Warning Sign, Blind Side. Neil Affleck plays Axel, Montreal actor. He had bit parts in Oh Heavenly Dog and Scanners. He would become an animation timer on The Simpsons in his later career. He was also in Visiting Hours and Murder by Phone in the 80s. Now, the other reason this movie is interesting is that it was the first movie that ever got into a major battle with the MPAA, not over sex, but over violence. The original had much more gore. We're not going to see what they actually shot because the footage doesn't exist. They had many more close-up kill shots. They had longer kills. The MPAA won't tell you what cuts to make. They just say, we don't like it as it is. Bring us another version. And so they brought him another version. They brought him another version. They brought him another version. Now, why were they being so tough on this film right in the middle of the slasher era? One reason. On December 8th, 1980, John Lennon got shot, and people don't remember, but everyone blamed it on media. Everyone blamed it on the killer being influenced by media. So Jack Valenti, who was head of the MPAA, said, "I don't want any major studios releasing any horror shit," you know, and he was really upset about the movie industry taking the blame for John Lennon's assassination. So now, that backlash only lasted 6 months. If this movie had come out 6 months later, they wouldn't even have noticed. They would have just waved it through with an R rating. But because it happened right after, it was submitted to the MPAA right after the John Lennon assassination, it got this intense scrutiny. You know, if you're going to bring this up, you know, you want to wait? You want to bring it out later? Well, no, we have to bring it out on Valentine's Day. Well, then, okay, you're going to cut it up. And so, and he was especially mad at Paramount that they would reduce themselves to horror films. They just picked it up, but they were distributing it, you know. Yeah, I can't believe you would reduce yourself to doing horror films. And so, the intention of the filmmakers was they wanted to set it in a place that had no jobs and no future, which doesn't come through because the miners obviously have jobs in the story. The director's favorite actor, by the way, was Tom Kovacs, who plays the character of Mike, the guy with the buck teeth. He disappeared off the face of the earth. I don't know where he went, but he was a very, very talented actor. Disappeared for 30 years, started acting again in TV series in 2010. And also Rob Stein as Sylvia's boyfriend John, the handsome blonde guy. Just remember the handsome blonde guy. Never made another movie. He's in the advertising business in New York. Helene Udy plays Sylvia. A guy named Don Franks who plays the police chief. Now, probably today, not many people have Don Franks photos in their album. One person is a Don Franks fan here. He just died last year, by the way. He was in his mid-80s. He was a jazz musician, and he was in the series La Femme Nikita. He played trombone, drums, and flute. He was adopted as a Cree Indian. He had this whole Indian part of his life in Saskatchewan. Mostly he was known for this jazz career. He played in Toronto at a place called the Purple Onion, and he played in New York at a Greenwich Village place called the Village Vanguard. And he was in Finian's Rainbow, opposite Petula Clark. He was in McCabe and Mrs. Miller. He was in over 200 TV series roles, Mannix, and all of those old cop shows. He was a voice actor on hundreds of commercials. The police chief, so remember, that's Don Franks. On Broadway, he was in On a Clear Day You Can See Forever for the whole run of it. He starred in Kelly, a Broadway show called Kelly, about a man planning to jump off the Brooklyn Bridge. It closed on opening night. My Bloody Valentine. Here the driving total: 16 dead bodies, 0 breaths. I think I blame that on Jack Valenti. I don't think that's 1 pickaxe into the back and out the front of the chest. Cannibalism. 1 vendetta against the Valentine's Day dance. 1 crispy laundrette lady. Sudden harmonica duet for no apparent reason. Hearts roll. Head rolls. Gratuitous minors showering. Gratuitous love triangle. Gratuitous killer POV with heavy breathing. Gratuitous bad Valentine's poetry. I'll give you a sample. Roses are red, violets are blue. 1 is dead, and so are you. Pickaxe food, hot dog water food, showerhead food, nail gun food, shovel food, Driving Academy Award nominations to Lori Howyer as Sarah, the object of the love triangle, for saying, "Do you mind? I have my own now, thank you." Larry Reynolds as Mayor Hanager for reminiscing, "I can remember those murders like it was yesterday." A lot of exposition scenes. To Don Franks as the Harry Chief Newbie for saying, "You just mentioned that Harry's back and this town won't be worth the powder to blow it to hell." And to Jack Vanavera as the ironically named Happy for being stuck with all the exposition and for snarling, This ain't no fairy tale, little girl. If you don't take it serious, you're a fool. 4 stars, Joe Bob says. Check it out.
All right, My Bloody Valentine. I'd like to poll the audience. How many of you have currently a harmonica in your pocket right now? Anybody? All right, those Canadians are showing us up. Mr. Joe Bob Briggs, ladies and gentlemen. The mail girl down there. I have a burning question that I thought of during that movie. You are a man who appreciates fun clothing, a nice pearl snap shirt, and a good pair of denim. What is Joe Bob's opinion on the Canadian tuxedo? Because we see a number of them. They, of course, originated that outfit.
I like everything about this movie in terms of production design, including all the moose heads. Did you notice all the moose heads?
Yeah.
Even carrying the Valentine decorations in a moose head box.
There's even moose.
Melba had a moose head box for her laundry.
Yeah. So this movie's always been interesting to me in terms of slasher films because it has all the makings of a great slasher film. You have the holiday, you have the slasher killer in the cool outfit with the cool weapon, but it doesn't, it's not up there in the pantheon of slasher films. What do you think that is? Why do you think it never quite caught on?
Well, I think it's only because they had to edit the kill shots out.
Yeah.
There were, you know, you don't really see, I would say about half of them, maybe even more than half of them, you don't even see the person die at all.
Right.
And so they had to cut the guts out of it, so to speak, to get that MPAA R rating. Unfortunately, there's no, you know, restored director's cut or anything because the footage was thrown away.
Yeah.
So.
What? So this movie you never did on MonsterVision, and you haven't done it on your Shudder series. What was your first experience? When did you see this film? It came out in 1981 in the States. Do you remember?
Too long ago. but you know, the acting is good. I think.
Yeah.
The acting is good. It has some goofy moments.
Yeah.
But for a slasher, the acting is really interesting.
Do you have a personal favorite Canuxploitation film? That's what it's called, Canuxploitation.
Well, I think Hello, Mary Lou would probably be the best.
Big Meat Eater
comes to mind immediately.
Yeah.
What did you say?
Big Meat Eater. Big Meat Eater.
Meat Eater.
Big Meat Eater.
Big Meat Eater.
Big Meat Eater.
Yeah.
When I was reviewing these films, I was unaware that there was a thing called Canadian horror. I mean, they were all the same to me. I mean, I didn't watch a film and think, oh, that one was made in Canada. Let's have Canadian horror night. You know, I didn't really make a distinction between American horror and Canadian horror. So I didn't know until recently that Canadian horror was a thing. You know, but they're very proud of certain films.
And we're still getting some great Canadian horror. I mean, Tucker and Dale vs. Evil was. You're a fan of that one.
Well, there's a lot of films like that are shot in Canada, but they're not really. It's not really.
They're not tax evasion movies like.
No, it's not. I mean, the director of Tucker and Dale is American.
Yeah.
It's Sally Field's son.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right here.
The similarities in the premise between this and was it Prowler? I was wondering if any of the same people worked.
Similarities between this and Prowler, I would say nobody worked on this that worked on Prowler. No, I would say there's absolutely no crossover between those two movies. I guess similarities in terms of like a killer from the past coming back with sharp implements. I think we could find a lot of slasher movies that have that similarity. But no, the Prowler was. The Prowler was made in Cape May, New Jersey, with Tom Savini effects, and had probably some of the most gruesome effects that they did not cut away from those effects. And it's interesting though, because they were made the same year. Yeah. And you know what I said before, if this movie had come out 6 months later, they wouldn't have cared about the gore element. And I guess the Prowler must have come out in late '81. And gosh, I mean, they held the camera on some of those shots too long. You can hold them on the shot so long that you start to be able to examine closely just exactly how the effect is being done. And there's a head blown off with a shotgun in that one. There's an extremely long, gruesome killing in a swimming pool. And but I don't think anybody that worked on the Prowler also worked on My Bloody Valentine. My Bloody Valentine was all Canadian.
I was just thinking of like the Forbidden Party. If they're doing it again,
Oh, the Forbidden Party. You shouldn't be having that party. Yeah, I mean that's not that original either. So, they were setting out to make a formulaic slasher. What makes it interesting is that they set it in this mining town. And they're not really teenagers. I mean, they're minors. They're minors in their 20s, But
they're not minors, but they're minors. Yeah, right here.
So I want to know, is there something that happened to this town? Because other than the last 5 minutes, where there seems to be a lot of 40-somethings helping dig people out, there are no children. There are no middle-aged people in this town. There's 50 plus and 25.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the actual town of Sydney Mines is about 8,000 people, and by all accounts, the whole town turned out to support the film. They were very happy to have the film in town, and so they could pretty much have their pick of extras that they wanted. But I think they were just on such a low budget, and they were rushed, and so they wanted to limit the number of people on set. And so if you weren't in the movie, you weren't on the set. I mean, they just didn't have time to shoot a bunch of B-roll. I think that's what it was, because they had to, they started in mid-September. They had to get this out in theaters by February 14th, and so it's amazing that they got it out at all, especially since then they had to cut it because of the MPAA ruling in January.
Is there any truth to the story? I read a story about this, that they scouted the town and they liked the town because it was already this rundown mining town, and then the town was so excited that they paid a bunch of money to like spruce the town up, and then they had to pay more money to like. No,
that is true. That is true. They liked the rundown look of it, and then when they got there, they fixed everything. And so that could also be a reason why you don't see the main buildings of the town,
Yeah, right here.
I would like to know, what is your favorite toilet death scene?
Well, my favorite toilet death scene would probably have to be that first spectacular kill in Street Trash. Yeah. That's yours too?
You're getting a Fangoria magazine. That was a shitty question and a great question at the same time. Yeah, all the way in the back.
Who do you think did the best, the warning bed? Crazy Ralph, Friday the 13th, or this guy in the bar?
What was the question?
Can you say it again? Who did it best? Crazy Ralph and Friday the 13th, or the guy in the bar?
Oh, crazy guy in the bar? Who's the best crazy guy in the bar? I think this guy is. This guy, I can't remember the name of the actor. But yeah, it's like, And he keeps coming back. He does the warning about 4 times.
Yeah, right here.
So, out of all the films, like I guess maybe from this era or not this era, that have been cut down and censored from their original gore cuts, which one would you want to see the most come back in their full gory glory? I guess?
Most films that were cut for violence in the 80s have all come back and been re-released in their gory form because there's money to be made in those Arrow Video Blu-rays. I mean, I think that for the most part, in the 70s and 80s, the MPAA would censor for sex, but they would not censor for violence. If you really cared about your release in Sweden, you had to edit for violence. But you know, there weren't enough people in Sweden to care. That was the only. Scandinavia was censoring for violence. Nobody else was censoring for violence. The movie that changed that was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, because the hardcore slasher films, moms never saw those, but they did see Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and they complained, you know, and so they started getting tough on violence and censoring films. Well, by that time, the slasher era was almost over, and so most of these films sailed right through. I mean, there are extremely explicit films like Nightmare, the 1981 Nightmare, that just sailed through with an R rating. It was only later. It was in the late 80s when you had movies that were censored, like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer didn't even have much gore in it at all. It was censored for moral tone. They started censoring for moral tone. If there was violence without retribution, and so. But they just, I mean, those guys from Chicago just said, well, fuck you, we don't care. We'll just release it NC-17, and they just took the hit and didn't get their R rating.
Slightly more exciting mine car chase in Temple of Doom than this movie.
I really wanted to ask, you mentioned at the panel at Frightmare that you were thinking about going into creating a production company. And I was wondering if you had any progress on that.
You said I was thinking about going into a production. Yeah, I'm still on that track to I don't want to direct or write or anything. I want to enable young talent to make the movie that they should be making.
Yeah, right here.
Hey, first of all, thanks for coming. Really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm always happy to be at the Texas, yeah.
So, we just announced another remake of Texas Chainsaw, and I just thought, since you're the expert, do you have any advice for those? I think it's directed to
I did see that they were going to remake it yet another time. He's talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I just saw that was just announced this week, right, or last week or something. I think it's, you know, the story is based on Hansel and Gretel. That's the story that, you know, it's like, you know, they go into the woods, they leave a trail, they have to go back. You know, it's a classic story, and it probably can be redone in every generation. How often do they remake a Stephen King film? Every 5 years? You know, it's become like certain horror stories have become like Broadway musicals. We're going to do Camelot again. You know, we're going to do Music Man again. We're going to do, you know, so we now have these classic horror stories that can be remade. And it's, you know, it's interesting to see if people can do the definitive one, you know. And so, yeah, I think it's I think it's fine. You know, the original one. You know, the difference is, you know, we can't go back and watch the first time that they did Camelot on stage. You know, and so we don't know if it's better, worse, whatever. We do know now. I mean, we can watch the original, we can watch the remake, we can watch the third time they make it, the fourth time they make it. You know, it's. I would like to see more original stories. You know, we remake because it's easy. We remake because it has a title that sells. You know, but there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna take a few more. I see a few more hands, so we'll take those. Whoa, right here. Okay, sorry, it's really bright up here and dark down there. Yeah, right here.
I was wondering if there's any specific movie that you remember that is what made you get into this profession.
Oh, you call this a profession? You know, what's interesting is I used to come, when I was first writing my column, Joe Bob Goes to the Drive-In for the Dallas Times-Herald, I actually used to come to this theater to review a lot of the, if I couldn't get to the drive-in, they would play the drive-in, and then this was a grindhouse.
Yeah.
This was basically a grindhouse. And I remember watching a lot of these movies where people would scream stuff at the screen and yell, and a lot of times I would decide whether I liked it according to how much people screamed in the theater, in this theater. But you know, it was a pit here too.
Yeah.
It was not a nice theater, but it was a great place to watch exploitation films. And you know, they used to have the Lee Harvey Oswald seat painted black at the back. I would always sit in it. I don't know why. I don't know why. It just made me feel good. I forgot the question.
Was there one movie that sticks out in your mind that kind of first inspired you to do what you do?
No, it was a series of things, and it wasn't just horror. It was other kinds of exploitation movies that only played at the drive-in, or only played at the grindhouse, and were not reviewed. They were not considered worthy of a review, and so I started reviewing them. And that's how the whole thing started. You know, I would call up the distributors and say, "When's your screening for this film?" "Oh, we don't screen our films for critics." You know? And the sole exception was Roger Corman. And Roger Corman, it's not like he would have a screening. He would say, "You know, go over to the Texas Theater on Wednesday morning. The movie's going to be released on Friday. The movie should be there by Wednesday morning. You know, have Vinny run it for you." And he also would say, you know, since a lot of times he didn't have a real press kit, you know, with stills in it. So he would say, you know, if you see something you like in the movie, just have Vinny cut a frame out of the movie, and he'll just splice it back together, you know. So that's how we got stills on a lot of these movies. And of course, they were much smaller. That was New World Pictures. There were much smaller companies like Motion Picture Marketing, and I can't remember all the names of the distribution companies, but Motion Picture Marketing, I would have to call that guy up. That was a guy named Lon Kerr. I would have to call him up and say, "Lon, I'm going to go to Swinging Waitresses, I think, this week." I said, "Is that the same thing as Eager Barmaids from last year?" He said, "Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm sending it out again. Yeah, we didn't do well with Eager Barmaids. We're going to Swinging Waitresses."
Yeah, right here.
You were in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, but sadly that scene never made it in the movie. How did that scene go down?
He's asking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 and my scenes in that. I went down to Austin to interview Dennis Hopper for Rolling Stone magazine. That's the only reason I was in Austin, and while they were shooting the film. And so Toby Hooper said, "Oh, you're that guy that wrote all the positive stuff about Texas Chainsaw Massacre." Yeah, I'm that guy. You know, get over here with Kit Carson, who was the screenwriter. Get over here with Kit Carson. Write yourself a scene. And And so there was another woman, and I can't remember her name, but she was a society woman in Dallas who was trying to take acting lessons and become a movie star. And she would fly to New York and fly to LA and fly to London and fly to Paris and try to ingratiate herself with all these different film directors, and very beautiful society woman. And so she was there, and she wanted to be in the movie. And so Toby goes, yeah, and I guess put her in too. And so we wrote this scene with there were two or three scenes, you know, where I'm basically being a blowhard. We're coming out of the movie theater, and I'm explaining how that, you know, this stuff is not real, and I know how to do it, and everything. And Leatherface, you know, just chainsaws me through the stomach, and then you see all this stuff flying past my head that are, I guess, parts of my body. Actually, right before it happens, I see, you know, the real Leatherface, and I go, well, nail my dick to a tree. Yeah. And so about 2 weeks before the movie came out, Toby Hooper called me and he said, I'm so sorry Menachem Golan took the scenes out. And I said, that surprises me so much, Toby, because it was such an integral part of the story. I can't imagine the story working without those two scenes. You know, because you basically just said, you know, stick the scenes in while you're sitting in your trailer one day. You know, I said, boy, what a, you know, I said, well, they're trying to make the running time shorter and everything. So then they restored them in the, and he said, oh, but I think 8 prints got out that had the scenes in them. You know, so apparently some prints had them. And then they put the scenes as a DVD extra in one of the DVDs.
Yeah. I love that you got to right here, cameo. That's great. All right, we're gonna take, we'll take like 2 more. See red right here, or pink. Yes, yeah.
With the outbreak of the coronavirus,
Topical. Hot take.
Did you just fly in from Wuhan?
I was just wondering what your favorite outbreak movie is, or maybe what outbreak movie is this reminding you of, or anything like that?
Oh, well, I would have to remind you of Rabid, don't you think? What other movies where you have
Outbreak.
Well, I mean, would Forbidden World count? You know, anything that's extremely contagious that moves fast, right?
It's just all zombie movies.
Yeah, any zombie movie.
Yeah. Let's get one from all the way in the back here. Yeah, right there.
I just wonder what compels you to adopt the moniker of Joe Bob rather than continue producing as Mr. Blue.
Your moniker of Joe Bob Briggs.
What about it?
What inspired it?
To go with that.
What inspired it? The Dallas Times-Herald was a mainstream newspaper, and the mainstream press did not cover exploitation films. It was not acceptable. You just didn't do it. The films were considered pornography or trash. You know, they were disposable. And so I had to have a way to review them that was considered not as directly, not as directly endorsing them, you know. And so I wanted the name to be populist name. I wanted it to be, you know, a name that so, you know, most people hate film critics. And so the idea was to have a film critic that was just like the people, you know, and like the same thing that the people do. And so, I don't know, Joe Bob Briggs, it sounded to me like a Texas name, and so.
I like Bobo Rodriguez better.
Yeah, that was my first name. I was going to use Bobo Rodriguez because it was kind of an Andy Kaufman idea, because I wanted it to be sort of multi-ethnic, and you didn't know exactly what he was, you know. And the editor said, no, if you use Rodriguez, it'll be perceived as a slur against Mexican Americans. And so I said, okay, well, we'll just slur against white people.
All right, we want to hear a question about the mighty return and resurgence of Joe Bob. So take it away, sir. Last question, all the way in the back. You've got a cowboy hat on. That is very fitting.
Would you ever consider doing like a live studio episode here at the Texas Theater?
Whoa.
A live episode? We have talked about, we have actually talked about doing a live on-stage episode of The Last Drive-In at a theater, and it was first brought up. I did a show on Hollywood Boulevard at the Egyptian Theater not too long ago, and the guys there wanted me to come back and do something live, and so maybe Barack wants, maybe he would be in favor of doing it too, but I mean, the logistics of it are nightmarish, but yeah, I mean, it's like that seems like something we could do. I mean, I know MST3K guys do. I don't know if they've ever done a live. No, they've never done a live.
They do. Yeah, they do live shows.
They do shows, but have they ever done a broadcast? A live broadcast from a theater? I don't think.
Oh,
so.
a live broadcast?
I don't think so. No. We're talking about a live broadcast.
Like a live
broadcast, where you have an uplink and it's like a football game.
Yeah, we have to see if Renee was.
I would be happy to do it. I would do it in a minute if somebody would tell me that. I mean, it's not like the show's not already full of mistakes.
All right. Well, if you had a question, you can ask it out in the lobby. You're going to be back at your table.
Yeah, I'll be out in the lobby.
Darcy has Valentines that apparently have blood all over them.
Yeah, I mean, everybody in the audience gets a Darcy Valentine. I believe Darcy Valentine.
So let's give another round of applause. Stars in My Bloody Valentine. Because it was all minor roles.
Thanks, Joe Bob. Appreciate it. That was awesome. Anyway, it's super late. I gotta head on back. I gotta get up work early. Joe Bob was incredible, and it was so great to hear him talk, to hear his thoughts on these movies. But anyway, I'm gonna wrap up something cool to watch. If you like what you see, please subscribe and have the most rockin' day.